So we begin Volume 6 right after the events of Volume 5 with a meeting with the Merciless Queen and No Face. They converse, and the Merciless Queen thinks they have completed their objective as they have invaded into the United Kingdom territories. However, No Face says that the objective is still incomplete, since his goal is to specifically capture Shin, Annette, and Vika for certain reasons. And Shin may be a worthy successor for the total command of the Legion, but you might ask, why are they looking for a successor? Well, it all comes back to the Legion's safety measures, that they would shut down after a certain period of time if they had no new orders. And when they don't have any new orders, they would request orders from their superiors, and if there wasn't anyone available, they were designed to look for a successor they deemed fit to command them. And the footage the Phoenix captured, they were able to get an idea of what Shin looked like. And Shin, having similar genetics of a Gyadian Imperial bloodline, makes him the perfect candidate for a successor. However, they find out that he's a teenager, and there's no heir to the Imperial bloodline at that age range, since if there was, they wouldn't have crowned Frederica as the Imperial Princess. With this information, No Face decides that Shin must be exterminated instead, which confused the Merciless Queen as she asks him to confirm if they're seeking a successor. No Face tells her,
"Affirmative. Our mission is to seek out the successor to absolute command and swiftly dispose of him."
Now, after the Reavage Citadel base has been retaken by our squad, and with reinforcements arriving, the Legion had no choice but to retreat. Shin and Lena are on their way back to the capital as they sat in a heavy transport vehicle. They were sitting opposite to each other as Lena frowned, recalling Shin's expression when he observed the Mountain of Sirens. Most of the processors on the train were pretty much asleep as everyone was fatigued from the battle, including Shin. So Lena, being his best friend, wanted to warm him up as she thought he wouldn't get much rest if he was cold. Lena grabbed the blanket, and as she was unfolding it, Shin's eyes flustered open and looked up to Lena in a daze. Lena realized how close they were. She reflexively jumped back and dropped the blanket on Shin's lap. She tells him to go back to sleep, but Shin, thinking they're still in enemy territories, knows that's not happening. He's also thinking about the words Lena said to him about learning to love the world and its people, which he questions her if she could still say that after seeing what the humans have done, which Lena sort of dodges that question and tells him to go back to sleep again. And Shin, being extremely exhausted, he leaned back and finally fell asleep. Now, we have another strategy briefing back at the royal capital with Safar and his father. To summarize, most of the United Kingdom forces were pushed back to their reserve encampments. The Legion were about to prepare a big offensive with a large army of larvae and dinosaurias, which I think I mentioned in the last volume. It was about 8,000 units. And due to the countless Eintagsfliege in the skies, blocking the sun, causing the low temperature in the spring, if they don't deal with them by summer, the farmlands in the south will be ruined and they'll lose more resources. They estimate that they'll have about a month and a half before they get wiped off the face of the planet, so they have to destroy the Legion base at the Dragon Fang Mountain as quickly as possible. So their plan is to slip through the Legion defenses, take control of the mountain, halt the deployment of the Eintagsfliege, and this will also disrupt their unit production, then capture the Merciless Queen, then get out safely and they live happily ever after. And of course, it's going to be the strike package doing this because who else are they going to send? While the Juggernauts are being restocked and the Dragon Fang Mountain operation is being revamped, Lena and a group of senior processors are back at the royal capital for another strategy meeting. During the meeting, Bertold checks in on Shin to see if he's okay, but Shin is still in a bad mood, thinking about the Siren Bridge in the previous battle. Also, remember how I said Raiden was from a group called the Aquila, which had a subgroup called the Ison from the last video? Well, there's also a subgroup in that subgroup called the Vargas, which Raiden is a part of. And the Vargas would have this beastman mentality, which Raiden's parents hated that ideology, which is one reason why they moved to the Republic. Because Vargas people were treated like werewolves rather than humans. And we also find out, back when Shin first met Raiden, he was more of a savage and would attack anyone that would get in his way. As they discuss about the Dragon Fang Mountain operation, due to the lack of United Kingdom forces, they'll have to change their plan of attack. And because they have fallen back to the second front, they'll have to cross 90 kilometers instead of 70. And the Legion numbers are barely changing as there is a Weisel mass producing units at the Legion base. So there wasn't many options they have, but Lena has something on her mind. After the meeting, Shin and Rito catch up with Ludmilla. Rita was still scared of the sirens, as they were pretty similar to the Legion, since they are weapons made by assimilating the neural networks of the dead. They found it gruesome that Lamilla kind of died on the battlefield a few days ago, but she's back as if nothing happened, as if their death was devoid of meaning and value. As Lena is walking down the corridor, she passes by Lercia, and they converse about how quick it took to repair her. Lercia then goes on a monologue, talking about how her and the sirens took pride in being a weapon and dying in order to destroy the enemy. She turns her gaze towards an old sword on display and states, "That sword is far more pitiful than we could ever be. It was made to cut down its foe and shatter in the heat of battle, but it will never fulfill its destiny. The technological advancements of war have rendered it obsolete, reducing it to an ornament that must forever have its shame on display for all to see. The same is true for you." Lena paused before asking her if they pitied them, which Lercia gave her a nod and goes on another monologue about how humans despise war, but continue to fight on the battlefield, and when they die, that's the end of their existence, and that their time in the world is meant for more than just war. Lena agrees with that, as she doesn't claim any pleasure or joy being on the battlefield, and she wished she didn't have to fight at all. However, because the 86s choose to fight, she chooses to fight alongside them. At the end of their conversation, Lercia tells her that she is of the opinion that Sir Reaper and the rest of the 86s do not wish to be on the battlefield as well. Later on, Frederica has a small tea party with Raiden, and they talk about the morale of the younger processors and how climbing over the sirens was traumatic to them. Raiden wasn't affected by it that much because he's seen more human kindness than others. But like the others, he didn't want to end up like the sirens, and he feels like there's nothing they could do to prevent that. And just like Shin, Raiden does not want to remember his family, his hometown, the future he had vaguely dreamed about back then. Because after all, an 86 had to believe that's not something they were allowed to wish for. We transition over to the lower ranking processors, as Karina has been salty ever since they retook the Reavage Citadel base. She believes that they are nothing like the sirens, but she spoke as if she was in denial. Then Dustin checks in on Anju to see if she's alright. Dustin was kinda unfazed by the sirens, because it's not like he had seen mounds of corpses before during a large scale offensive in the Republic or anything. Dustin states that it might come off as disrespectful, but I don't understand why you're disturbed by all of this. It was a horrible operation, but you know, when we saw the brain samples, there were all those skeletons. The sirens weren't any worse than that, so I honestly don't get why you're so bothered by it. And at this moment, Anju realizes that Dustin is really different from them. Dustin apologizes to her, as Anju questions him, asking him what he thinks is the missing factor that would have made the 86s like him, and what they need to hold on to stay normal. Dustin looked away and tells her, "I think you've got it wrong. It's not that I think you guys aren't normal or something. It's just a difference in values. But I do think the way you live right now is kind of torture. It's like you're willingly tying yourselves up. Whenever you guys call yourselves 86, it feels to me like you're also saying you can't be anything but 86. Like you're saying you can't hope to be anything other than you are right now." Later on, Vika has a meeting with his aunt, Svetlana, and she was actually the Dinarok's Esper before her powers got passed down to Vika. We also find out that in exchange for their transcendent intellect, many of the Dinarok Espers lacked a sense of ethics and empathy. She tells him that he's immature, and deep down, she knows that he hates fighting on the battlefield, and he's only fighting because he's bound by the words Lercian Li told him. But Vika tells her that she's the same as him, as his father is dear to her heart. After finishing the changes to the Dragon Fang Mountain operation, Lena needs to attend a grand conference to have them approved by the king and the United Kingdom superiors. But before she goes, she has a conversation with Shin, as Lena tells him that she's worried about him, and she brings up that she spoke to Lercia the other day, that he doesn't want to be on the battlefield, which Shin cuts her off, saying that it's the same for her. And Shin questions her, after seeing some traumatic events, has she ever thought that she's had enough? And has she ever felt like she didn't want to go on? And how could she not bring herself to feel that way? Which Lena knows full well how cruel people can be, but we get the answer that she hasn't given up on it because the world still has things worth loving. And it's not just that, it's also that there's enough beauty in the world to outweigh the ugliness, which allows her to continue to love the world. And it's not that she hasn't given up hope because she hasn't seen enough cruelty, but because she wants to believe that the world can still be a place where people can be happy and peaceful. Which Shin did not expect that kind of answer. Lena continues, saying that she wants everyone to be happy and doesn't want to live in a world where that can't happen. which is why she couldn't give up, and she says that she doesn't want to admit that the battlefield and the way the Republic treat the 86s were the true faces of humankind, and she couldn't accept that can never change. Which in Shin's mind, he couldn't feel that way. The only reason he's fighting is because he wanted to show her the sea, which is probably different from Lena's idea of happiness, and he couldn't wish for a future or for happiness. So he had no faith in the world and no reason to love it. He thought their outlooks on life were completely different and that they were too far apart to understand each other, but he still hoped that this happiness would be granted to the world Lena loves. After their conversation, Lena and Vika head over to the Grand Conference, and Lena was forced to wear a dress. I will show an image of what she looks like in the dress later, but for now, you'll have to use your imagination. But Vika tells her about how disappointing it is that Shin isn't here to see her in the dress, which it would be a great shame if he never got a chance to see her in it. Usually in the Republic and the Federacy, dresses were worn for occasions like weddings and parties, not war councils. But this is the United Kingdom, so things were different. Which Vika kind of teases Lena that the dress won't go to waste after all, as she could keep the whole set, as it could be useful to her until she finds someone to escort her. Which Lena turned red at Vika's implication, because the only one who would escort her in a dress would be her husband or boyfriend. Which Lena shouts that she doesn't have anyone like that, which Vika tells her. Hence, until you find that someone, or rather, he paused to eye her with a pitying gaze. I doubt it's possible, but don't tell me you're not aware of it yet. Lena responds that she's unaware, which made Vika shake his head. I see, so you aren't. That's rather unfortunate. I would even call it irritating to think both of you are like that. Now during the conference, Lena meets Vika's brother, Safar. He reminded Lena of Shin's brother back when she first met him many years ago. She asked him about what his feelings are towards Vika, which judging by that question, Safar knows that Lena thinks Vika is strange. And he starts monologuing about the catastrophe of Babylon, which was taught in the Republic, so Lena is familiar with it. He states, in the myths that preceded the Bible, humankind built a tower so their prayers might reach the heavens, but the gods mistakenly thought humankind was trying to attack them, and cursed them for that reason. Even the gods struggled to reach perfect understanding among themselves, so it was difficult for them to understand imperfect creatures like humans. Ironic perhaps, but anyways, in my eyes, the fact that humankind began quarreling among themselves once they become unable to understand one another is quite striking. It means they did not truly trust one another when they spoke a common tongue. Those words stabbed Lena in the heart, as she felt like he was talking about her and Shin. He continues his monologue, talking about how even if him and Vika are completely different, they could still believe in each other, stating, he might not understand what makes people sad or why they feel sorrow, but he does understand when Father and I become sad and tries to avoid causing us grief, and that's enough for me. He may not live according to the same logic and values I abide by, but he still tries to love me in his own way. He's my precious younger brother. Now we get a glimpse inside Lena's mind as she has a flashback to her argument with Shin back in Volume 4, and that she's sad that Shin and the rest of the 86s had given up on the world. But what made Lena sadder was that Shin couldn't understand why this made her sad. She wanted Shin to understand her, and she wishes he was more like her. She also has a flashback to when Vika called her arrogant, as Lena realizes that she never made an effort to understand the 86s, and only wished for them to understand her one-sidedly. So Lena asks Safar that if he's so different from Vika, how do they maintain their relationship? Which he tells her, oh, that's quite simple. Some things I compromise on, while others I refuse to relinquish. For some things I defer to him, while with others, I have him conform to my way of thinking. We both respect each other's boundaries until we find a point of compromise. That's how people normally interact, though it did take us years to get here. Which Lena agrees, because even if there is a rift between them right now, Lena thinks if they try to understand each other little by little, one day they'll be able to stand side by side. Afterwards, since Lena's time at the conference is over, while Vika still has business over there, he called an escort for her to get her back to the barracks. Which I wonder who Vika got as Lena's escort. Oh my god, it's Shin! Which Lena's expression lit up, while Shin stopped in place as he looked up to her. He came to the realization that she doesn't need him, because the way he saw her in that dress was how she should have been. He thought she never belonged on the battlefield, while Shin only knows of war and hardship. He believed he had no place beside her, and that Lena didn't need him in order to survive, and the fact that he couldn't wish for a future only hurts her, and he never bothered to try to understand her, so he thought they never belonged together to begin with. Now, as they approach each other, Shin hesitates for a long moment before offering his arm to her, which Lena knew lending a hand was considered good manners for men, but the fact that he took so long made Lena think she came off as indecent, which she accepted his gesture, but she couldn't bring herself to wrap her arm around his, so she only held onto his sleeve, and their walk was as awkward as ever. Lena then brings up the question again, is there anything he'd like to do? Anywhere he'd like to go? Something he'd like to see? Which Shin sighed before telling her, there's nothing. But in his mind, we all know that he wants to show her the sea, but he couldn't bring himself to say it because of the realization he had earlier about how he thinks he doesn't belong with Lena, so he won't wish to show her the sea, never again, he thought. And since both of them are so wrapped up in their thoughts, neither of them paid attention to their feet, so Lena tripped on a lump of ice, but Shin reflectively caught her in his arms. Shin asked her if she was okay, which Lena's voice was higher pitched than usual. And upon hearing her thin squeak of a voice, he realized the position they were in and hurried to let go. Lena's face was redder than he'd ever seen before, and as Shin was apologizing to her, Lena suddenly burst into laughter, and she tells Shin that he's kind, which Shin thinks she's exaggerating as he's not really aware that helping others came so naturally to him that he couldn't perceive it as kindness. Lena then starts monologuing about how even if he saw the world as cruel, if he can still find hope despite all of that, then if he does find something he wanted, she wanted him to know that he's allowed to wish for it. She tells him, even if the world seems just as cruel and heartless as ever, we are no longer in the 86th sector. Your wish could come true. I just want you to remember that. And if you don't mind, when the time comes, please share your wish with me. Shin was at a loss of words as we dive inside his mind as he thought about showing Lena the sea again. He saw himself as a monster that could only hurt her, so he needed to change if he wanted to fight by her side. And he contemplates, what does he want for himself? How could he change? Would he truly be able to imagine the future? Something he never imagined before. And that is the end of the chapter.